and it is good to see everyone's happy face. Good morning, U.S. history. I hope you are doing well, and I hope that you had a fantastic weekend. So I'm just going to jump right in it. There shouldn't be any questions right now because we don't have any. We have the one assignment, I believe, that you turned in last week, and we have one that's kind of hanging out there in the assignment netherworld waiting to land on you, right? But we're wanting to finish everything. At this point, probably you're aware why I wanted to cover civil rights around the turn of the century. Are you kind of already figuring it out? I mean, do you kind of see why? It's because, you know, with the progressive era making all of these, with all of these different reform movements that were part of the progressive era, and a lot of groups actually making some legitimate gains, like labor, women's rights, etc. The one group and the one area that was left behind is largely civil rights. As a matter of fact, it was the low point. It's rather ironic in U.S. history that the low point of civil rights history happens in an era of time that we call the progressive era. Does that mean that the progressive era was not successful? Well, that's up to you to determine. I mean, it accomplished a lot of its goals. Of course, it did not do much for small farmers. Farming crisis continued. It didn't do anything for rural areas a lot. Okay, Kate Rivers, thank you for speaking up. It may be that way for a lot of students. Are you guys having difficulty hearing me?
No, sir.
Good deal.
I can hear you just fine.
Good.
No,
it's good. And I'll remind you guys that if you miss anything, if you didn't get a chance to take a screenshot of a note slide, if you're writing down major themes, then we can, you can go back and watch this on the Corinth High School Social Studies YouTube channel. Has anyone had a chance to do that at all? Does it help? No one's had a chance. Okay. All right. So you know that you have the big essay on success or not of the progressive era that doesn't have a due date yet. And you know that there's going to be a test over the progressive era. All right. You know that I will be looking at your notes at some point. What we're going to do, and if I'm understanding the board policy correct, and I believe that I am, any student, not just, you know how I've been allowing you guys to make up grades, and you need to continue to send me those emails so that I can address that and change that for you. Because at any point I can go back and remove any zero. All right. So if you get that work to me, I can get zeros removed from your grade. But beyond that, a lot of students use the 4th 9 weeks to massage their grade a little because, you know, GPAs do matter. So if you're needing that, what we're going to do is the work that I assign and the test that I assign during this period online between now and the end of the year, you will be able to improve your grade up to 10 points from your, if it's a low grade, from your 3rd 9 weeks. And it doesn't have to be even a non-passing grade. You can improve your grade up to 10 points. And so that's basically what's going to happen is the grade from your 3rd 9 weeks that you had now becomes your 2nd semester grade. Okay. And that 2nd semester grade can be improved up to 10 points. All right. So the work that you do, the essays you turn in, the tests that you take, etc., is what will determine the amount of those 10 points that get added. Does that make sense? We all on board? Thumbs up. Good deal. Any possible way you can let us know when you the slide. I'm asking you to take a multiple screenshot. Yeah, someone just mentioned that, you know how I jump back and forth between slides, and sometimes I'll go to the next slide, then come back to the same slide. It may be causing some issues for you. You may be like double screenshotting slides. I'll try to do better, but I can't promise, you know, but I'll try to do better on that. So let's just jump straight in it, shall we? or not. All right, can everyone see the screen? Hope so. So now I have your lovely faces on the right side that I can scroll down. Is everyone seeing that? Andrew, when I change the student view screen, can you actually see that on your screen when I do that? You can't see me scroll down? Like right now, I'm scrolling from screen to screen of students. You can't see that happen? Belle, can you see that happen on the right side of your screen?
Like I can see like 5 people that I've selected to see, but like I
Ah,
can't.
I got you. That's cool. Good deal. So you control your right side of your screen. I don't control that part of your screen. Is that correct? Good deal. All right. So in 1900, remember Williams versus Mississippi, Plessy versus Ferguson. At this point, Jim Crow has been born. All right. Segregation is in place, separate but equal. But we know, obviously, that separate is inherently unequal. We saw that the odd historical voice on the Supreme Court that spoke out against it. But keep in mind, just because Jim Crow was born, that does not mean that Southern African Americans gave up. Remember that socially, politically, culturally, economically, there had been significant strides made by African Americans in the South. And Black Southerners weren't just going to hand that over. So yeah, this began the great struggle for civil rights. There was court case after court case after court case, and that's the importance of the early 20th century NAACP, is they begin to chip away at that precedent. You understand that term, precedent? Okay. They begin to chip away at the precedent of Plessy versus Ferguson for years and years, decade upon decade, until finally it fell in 1954. But guys, this took over half a century to do away with. This is another slide, so be aware. So let's look at some of these political situations in 1900. So here now we have just en masse in the South disenfranchised an entire group of people. Does everyone understand disenfranchised? Remove the right to vote. Court cases had undermined the 14th and 15th Amendment. Jim Crow laws were in place. Politically, the situation was less than optimal, obviously, because if you want to remove in American politics, in American life, if you want to remove a group's power, their voice, you remove their political voice first, right? Without a political voice, it diminished African American influence and power, not culturally, but at least politically. Economically, now, it wasn't a utopia. Please understand that I'm not trying to say that the South was a utopia in Reconstruction, that suddenly there was racial harmony. I'm not trying to sell that idea. You guys understand that, right? Okay. But in 1880, shortly at the end of, by the way, I'm going to pause just a minute, guys. We have a new student today. I wanted to make sure that I covered the grading policy properly. I don't know if he actually heard that or not. If you have any questions for administration, you can now ask.
Hey guys, how's everybody doing?
Fantastic.
Good. How are you?
Doing pretty well. Well, I just wanted to drop in. Thank you, Mr. Henson, for inviting me to it and giving me just a minute to say hello to everybody. I hope everybody's doing well. I know this is certainly not what you guys were planning on for the remainder of the year, but you'll learn in life as we go through. There's a lot of times we get dealt hands that we don't anticipate, and we just have to do the best to make lemonade out of lemons sometimes. So I just want to take a brief minute to tell you how proud I am of you, of the job you've been doing in this transition to virtual learning. It's new to all of us, but you guys have made it go about as smoothly as could be anticipated. And like I've been telling several of the classes that I've dropped in this morning, it's pretty easy to do the right thing and to be working hard and do all the things that you're expected to do when things are going well. But you really see the true character of folks when things are not going well and how they respond to it. And you guys have done an excellent job of transitioning. You're still signing on. You're doing your work even when it's not, the easiest traditional way to do it. So fantastic job to you. Thank you, Mr. Henson, and the rest of the staff for the job that y'all have done from the teacher side of making this transition and getting on here weekly to provide quality instruction. The big thing that I would tell everybody, we're going to get through this, and life is going to get back to normal, and next year is going to happen. And so what I would challenge each of you to in these last several weeks that you've got for this year, you all probably saw the grading policy the board policy as far as grades for the remainder of the year. Some of you may be, looking at that going, hey, I got an opportunity to do the work that we're doing and improve my average by up to 10 points for T3. And that would be fantastic. And some of you may say, hey, I'm really content with my grade for T3. What should I be doing? What I would challenge each of you is whether you're happy with your grade or not, you still need to be doing the work because there's still learning that needs to take place. We've still got over a month of school to go. And so everything that you're doing right now is relevant to your course and is going to help prepare you better so that when you walk in the door to begin next year, you're not having to play catch up. You're ready to go. And you've got everything that you need, or at least to the best of your ability, to walk in and pick right up without there being any break in learning, and just do the best you can. So that's what I would challenge each of you as we're going into this last little over a month of school, to really lock in, do your assignments, and focus more on the learning and not worry so much about the grades, but making sure that you're doing everything that you can do to learn everything you need to learn so that when it comes time to walk in next year, you're ready to go and you hadn't missed anything this year. So, Mr. Henson, I don't know what all you had covered with them before I got here, but I hope we were speaking the same message.
I would like to piggyback that for just a moment also, Mr. Barnett. Remember, guys, that you are in an AICE class and you will be receiving AICE credit. So to receive the AICE credit, you have to participate in the full year's scope of curriculum that is content curriculum. And we are on that last section, and we will complete that via assignments and the test. That's what we're currently doing. So for us to justify the marks that you'll be receiving for this class, you will have, not only do you need it just for the sake of actually learning and for the 10-point grade, but also in this particular class being an AICE class, for us to justify your digital file with Cambridge, you need to be here during the class time. And you've been great about it, guys. It makes it seem like I'm getting on to you in some capacity. I'm not. You've been absolutely wonderful, and I appreciate it. But that's what we're moving towards. We need to get you that AICE credit. So.
Absolutely.
All right,
thumbs
guys.
up, thumbs down. Everybody doing okay? Y'all making it through this?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
All right, guys. If you had a question for your administrator, he's here right now, and you got a one-on-one opportunity, face to face.
Yeah, I got one question.
George.
All right, so I know, kind of like you said, Cambridge is going to, for our exam grades, they're going to be looking at some of our past assignments for justification for what teachers give us as our marks.
Mm-hmm.
Will any future assignments be considered in the justification for said marks, or will it only be past assignments?
Yes,
No, it can be future too. That's really going to be up to Mr. Henson. There's not a blanket answer. We're not saying, hey, for every AICE class, this is the way that it's going to be. But I think for Mr. Henson, from everything he was just saying, some of the work you're doing right now that you will be completing in the coming days and weeks will be factored in and considered for that grade decision. So yes, you need to be buckling down across the board and working. And like I tell you guys, if you leave here as Corinth graduates and all you have learned is math, science, reading, and social studies, we've really not done the full depth of our job. This is a tremendous learning opportunity for you to learn how to adapt and overcome, and know that regardless of the setting and situation, you still should be striving to do your best in everything that you do. Whatever you do, when you wake up in the morning, strive to be the best and do your best, whatever that assignment is. And in this case, it's going to pay off for you for helping to justify ACE credit. But whatever it is, wake up in the morning and strive to do your best and be your best, whatever it is.
All right. Who else has a question? You got him right here.
All right, guys. Well, I'm going to get out of your way and let Mr. Henson get back to it. But again, proud of the job you're doing. Keep up the good work. Mr. Henson, thank you for everything you're doing. And we're going to keep on rocking and rolling. I'll be back in to see you guys periodically over the next few weeks. I haven't been dropping in for the first few weeks just because I've been trying to stay out of the way and let your teachers get everything set up and do what they needed to do to communicate with you and instruct you. But since the announcement came out last week that the buildings are going to be closed for the remainder of the year, I definitely wanted to take some opportunities to drop in and let you know that I'm thinking about you. I love you guys. Y'all are doing great. I've been proud to be your principal all year, but seeing the job you're doing on things like this just makes me even more proud. So keep up the good work. Keep working hard. If you need us, feel free to email us, and life will get back to normal. We're going to be okay, and we're gonna be back in this building before you know it, and back to doing everything that we enjoy doing. So follow all the guidelines to keep the spread of this thing as under control as we can, so that we can get back to life as we know it as soon as possible. So thank you, guys. Keep working hard, and y'all have a great day. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Henson.
Oh yeah, no problem. Thank you, Mr. Barnett. We appreciate it. Well, guys, while he was talking, I was just scrolling through the students to see if there were any hands up, and I noticed several of you eating cereal. Man, y'all just waking up right before this class, aren't you?
I woke up for my first class, then went back to sleep and woke up for this class.
Gotcha. Well, that makes sense. Boy, that'd be hard to do this class. Like, you just wake up and then turn on your computer and there's my face doing this. Whoo! That's a lot to take in the morning time. All right. Well, moving forward. Let's look at some of the economic. I'm trying to get my little bar out of the way so I can see. There we go. Here we go. Admit. I think some people are having some internet issues. Remember that if it drops you off at any point, Corinth High School Social Studies YouTube channel will have the recording of the video. I'm trying to admit Cameron repeatedly, and it's not letting me. So if he texts, let him know we're trying. All right. All right. In 1880, let's look at some of the economic gains that Black Southerners had made during this time period. Remember, not a utopia, not trying to say that, but 3.8% of Southern acreage, land, was owned by African Americans in 1880. In just 20 short years, now I need you to absorb this for a moment, just how monumental a shift that is. In just 20 short years, outside of the realm of Jim Crow, they owned 1/4 of all acreage. Now, that doesn't equate to, if African Americans were 45% of the population base and they only own 25% of the land, that's not an equitable distribution. I get that. But to go from 3.8 to 25% is rather significant in 20 years. So there had been economic gains. Were there economic chains placed on both poor African American and poor white Southerners as well with sharecropping? Of course, not trying to say that, but you can see there was some gains. African Americans in the South during Reconstruction, post-Reconstruction, 1880s, owned cotton mills, all types of factories and businesses. One of the largest cotton mills in South Carolina, and indeed in the United States, was owned by a Black guy. And he employed both Black and white workers who worked side by side. In other words, you had a Black guy who owned a huge cotton mill who employed former Confederates. Are you absorbing that? who worked side by side with former slaves. Now, this is a story that's oftentimes underrepresented in American history, that there were gains being made. Again, not a utopia, but there were gains being made. Now, let's look from the birth of Jim Crow, in the mid to late 1890s. By 1910, not a single cotton mill in the entire South even employed an African American, much less owned by one. So did Jim Crow work? Holy cow, did it ever. The system of segregation that was put in place was very effective politically. It was effective economically. Educationally, that is the one area where that it's most obvious that African Americans kind of, what's the right word? Justifiably struggled hard against the system, that despite the change placed on education in the African American community through less resources, poor facilities, overcrowding in some cases, no resources in other cases, African American education still soared, still excelled during the turn of the century. And there's a reason for that. Keep in mind, during this antebellum days, do you guys know what I mean by antebellum? That means pre-war, pre-Civil War. So during slave times, education was forbidden. You know that. Reading and writing, not allowed. It was against the law. So if something is against the law and is held back from an entire people group, then I think it keeps kicking people off of here, doesn't it? Kate Rivers, you're back in. Cameron, I think you had to come back in. So, hey, hang in there. And again, hopefully it will be available on YouTube. Welcome back, Kate Rivers. Education. Reading and writing, literacy had been prohibited during pre-Civil War era for slaves in the South. So that had become a symbol of power. That had become a symbol of voice. That had become a symbol of freedom and liberty and economic attainment, etc. So you can imagine that the freedmen, that first generation, the Civil War generation, the slave generation, saw education as the key to a better life. Make sense to you? Hopefully so. So they insisted that their children have an economic opportunity. And so there were a lot of former slaves who may not have learned to read and write eventually themselves, but insisted that their children learn. Now, a lot of former slaves actually did. The slave generation embraced education as a tool for better life. The first and second generation post-Civil War African-American Southern population embraced education as an economic tool, political tool, as a voice for civil rights. A lot of your early civil rights leaders came out of the education community. And so the first generation born into freedom and the Southern Black population absolutely embraced education as a civil rights strategy. Follow? Okay, next slide. And it worked. Black literacy rates shot through the roof. And you can see on the slide in front of you that Black literacy rates from the Civil War era, 5 to 10%, and 50% in 1910. And then for African, and see, that's you may not think that 50% is a high number, but you have to keep in mind that that includes former slaves. And a lot of former slaves didn't learn to read and write, but their children overwhelmingly learned to read and write. So the literacy rates among those among the Southern Black population after 1860 was dramatically higher than it was with the earlier generations. And it was dramatically higher than 50%. And of course, we've already discussed the traditional Black institutions in the South when we discussed the Gilded Age, remember? And so a lot of African Americans were pouring into these new Black educational institutions. in 1910, and this is overall, this is including the entire African American community, both former slaves and otherwise. And yes, in 1910, there were obviously still former slaves alive. 66% literacy rate. From a 5% literacy rate to a 66% literacy rate. It should be obvious just from this one simple graph that education was a primary focus of the African American community around the turn of the century. You can see the percentage of literate African Americans from 1865 through 1900. So education was such a focus that it became the center of the debate on actually how the civil rights movement should move forward. And if you look in textbooks, you'll see oftentimes a section that's entitled Booker T versus WEB, as though it's some wrestling match, right? And yes, I said wrestling, and it will go on YouTube. So yay for that. Anyway, it wasn't. They weren't like in opposition of one another. It says that in history books oftentimes because they represented 2 points of view in the African American community on how to move forward with civil rights. And if you recall, at the end of the Gilded Age, there was a section that I skipped over. I don't know if you remember it or not, but it was education. When we were discussing education and the expansion of education, it was African American education, and it had Booker T and WB. And I said, we'll cover that later. I don't know if you remember, because it was pre-COVID, so you may not remember it. Is anyone asleep yet? I'm trying to look. No? We should make coffee mandatory when I'm talking, shouldn't we? Hey, you're hanging in there. Awesome. Okay. Booker T and WB, new slide. Now, just looking at these two gentlemen, if you were to just be, what's the right term here? If you were to look at the pictures only and let the cover of the book tell you the content of the book, so to speak, and be stereotypical, which of these gentlemen do you think was a former slave?
The one on the right.
You say the one on the right.
The one on the right.
Why the one on the right? Why the gentleman on the right? Why the picture on the right?
Got a beard. Something about that.
Yeah, he just like whenever I picture like a slave in my head, he kind of looks more.
Well, actually, on the left is Booker T, and he was the former slave. And you can see if you look closely, the really high society style of in the picture on the right side, W.B. Du Bois was immaculate in the way that he presented himself. Not that Booker T wasn't, but you can see that Booker T's face is much more weathered. You know what I'm saying? Of course, he was older in this picture, so that's unfair. And you can't judge a book by its cover. But it would just appear, looking at the pictures, that the gentleman on the left has seen some outside hard labor at some point. It would appear to me. But it doesn't matter how it appears. Let's move forward with the actual stories. All right, Booker T. Washington, former slave from Virginia. Now keep in mind that accurate records are impossible to locate and weren't kept, quite frankly. So supposedly around April the 5th, 1856, and Booker T has gotten a bad rap over the years, and we'll get into why. After emancipation, he began to work in salt furnaces and coal mines. Now I'm going to pause there. You go from being a slave to working in salt furnaces and coal mines. Was this man afraid of labor? Oh, good Lord, no. Very hard worker. His work ethic was unbelievable. And from an early age, he was one of those great figures in American history who was naturally curious and was naturally engineer minded, so to speak, and uber intelligent. And so he wanted an education. He wanted to further that education, and he couldn't receive good schooling where he was. So at 16, his parents allowed him to quit work. He walked 200 miles. Now, let that sink in. He walked 200 miles to attend Hampton Institute in Virginia and paid his tuition by working as a janitor. Now, oftentimes we complain a little bit about having to have class online, right? And Booker T walked 200 miles to get an education. He first became a teacher. He went back to his hometown and then Hampton Institute, and eventually he founded the Tuskegee Institute. Still around today, obviously, Tuskegee. And he became a prolific voice in the African-American community. And guys, Booker T became rich, okay? And when I say rich, I mean rich. But he did it through, I'm not trying to insinuate that rich is a bad thing here in any capacity. He was a hard worker. He was focused. He was a fantastic speaker. He was a well-known speaker, actually. And he was excellent at raising funds. And he got donations from some of the biggest figures of the day, Carnegie, Rockefeller, etc. And in 1895, he had the prestige of speaking at the opening of the Cotton States Exposition, huge international trade show held in Atlanta. And it's remembered in history as the Atlanta Compromise Speech. Guess who called it? Guess who named it? The Atlanta Compromise Speech. Any guess? Booker T. All right? Booker T. By the time we get into Booker T's writing and participation in the civil rights community, pardon me, by the time, can I back up a minute and act like that never happened? W.E.B. is the one that named it that. Whew. I sit there and said Booker T like 3 times. W.B. is the one that named it that in a criticism that he gave of the speech. Now I can go back to where I was. Keep in mind that by the time that W.E.B. was active in the civil rights movement and was becoming a voice in the literary community, Booker T. Washington was a giant in the civil rights community. He was larger than life, okay? When he went around speaking, he didn't really go around fundraising. He went around sort of giving motivational speaks, and it was always Christian-based. He was a devout, faith-filled man. And so his speeches always had some type of theological premise or some type of ethical, moral-based purpose and conclusion. And he angered a lot of educated African Americans like W.B. Du Bois, but based on his opinions on civil rights. And on the other hand, white America loved him. Now, why would you think that is? Any guesses? Well, this is an excerpt from his speech, okay? The famous speech is known as the Atlanta Compromise Speech. A ship lost at sea for many days suddenly sighted. Why did it do that? There we go. A ship lost at sea for many days. I accidentally changed the slide, but I think some of you got the screenshot in anyway. From the mast of the unfortunate vessel was seen a signal, water, water, we die of thirst. The answer from the friendly vessel at once came down, cast down your bucket where you are. A second time, the signal, water, send us water, went up in the distressed vessel and was answered, cast down your bucket where you are. Third and fourth, signal for water, and again, cast down your bucket where you are. Eventually, the distressed vessel, and I'm paraphrasing because I can't see it, it's blocked by other things, at last heeding the suggestion, cast down his bucket, and up came sparkling water from the mouth of a river. They had actually drifted into the mouth of a river. Anybody want to guess what this was symbolic of? Booker T was all about economic independence. Booker T's idea was that, keep in mind that when he's speaking here, this is at the very birth of Jim Crow, okay? And no educated person, honest to God, thought that Jim Crow was something, a condition that was going to last for decades, all right? So we have the privilege of looking back on Jim Crow and segregation and the horrible few decades that followed in the South, specifically for Black Southerners. We have the privilege of looking back in history, knowing what happened, okay? In 1895, that's the very birth of it. It was just beginning to happen, okay? And no educated, clear-thinking, logical person felt that this is a condition that would last. His ideal was to become economically independent, for the Black community to become economically independent. That if you were a farmer, become a scientific farmer, become an educated farmer, study, research, and become extremely productive machinist, own businesses, to become economically independent in the technical and agricultural fields. That's why Tuskegee was initially a technical and agricultural school, because if you recall, in the late 1800s, becoming technologically and agriculturally, scientifically trained was the path to economic freedom in the Gilded Age. And so he felt that if the Black community could make the white community dependent upon them economically, that social equality would naturally flow. Follow? Now, I know that sounds kind of icky in 21st century thinking that you have to earn equality. I know that. But that was basically his idea. Earn economic independence and social equality will follow. He was invited to the White House. By the way, he actually spoke out saying that segregation could be a positive. Well, he didn't say positive force. I'm misrepresenting his view. He made the statement that white and Black America could work side by side with segregation. He used his hand as an example. He said that it's one hand, but that the fingers are separate. Follow? Okay, so maybe now you can understand why white America around the turn of the century would have felt comfortable around Booker T, because he didn't question the status quo. Follow? He instituted a variety of programs for rural extension work, established the National Negro Business League. He was invited to be named a sub-cabinet post. He withdrew his name from consideration and said, "You won't be reelected." He died in 1915, prior to our entry into World War I. He has caught a bad rap. In recent years, in the past couple of decades, some research has begun to come out that have really, in my opinion, for what it's worth, rehabilitated, not that he needed it, he was an outstanding giant in U.S. history, but that has kind of compromised that idea that he sold out to a degree. He was, I mentioned he was wealthy. Guess who was funding a lot of these, secretly, anonymously funding a lot of these court cases throughout the South that were challenging segregation? Booker T. Washington. See, publicly raising money and preaching economic freedom, but on the side also fighting the legal battle. So he's an outstanding personality in U.S. history. W.E.B. had a completely different idea. As you can see, Booker T believed that African Americans should develop practical vocational skills to acquire property, and that would lead to economic prosperity. That's the cast your bucket where you stand. And that they could succeed in occupations that white America needed them to fill, and then white America would become dependent on them. African Americans should, he said, stop demanding equal rights and through compromise get along with white America. So the key to social equality in Booker T's eyes was economic independence, and he strongly advocated vocational education. I'll just let you look at some of this information, and so that you can get these screenshots in. So as you can see at the bottom of this slide, in Booker T, you might could paraphrase his entire philosophy that equals equality. Become economic equals and you'll become social equals. Doesn't that feel that feels uncomfortable, doesn't it? But that was the case. That was kind of his philosophy. Again, privately funded legal challenges to segregation. Booker T, completely different background. Guys, it's almost time for class to end. We have 3 minutes, so when I end the recording, when I say I'm stopping recording, if you have any questions about anything, if you need me to answer any questions about grades, if you need me to be aware of something that you're trying to get completed for your grade, if you need to any type of clarification on anything, I'll be around to answer that question. To the rest of you, thank you for being invested. Remember that we're doing cameras on from now to the end of the year, so be prepared for that. Guys, you're doing a great job, and I really appreciate it. I think that the grading policy they have come up with is fair and just. No, I have not assigned the new journal entry because we really need to finish the civil rights information. So if you have questions for me, please hang around and ask those questions. Otherwise, remember that the copy of the video will be uploaded to YouTube, Corinth High School Social Studies YouTube channel. And you can, if you didn't get screenshots of the notes, you'll be able to do so. If you have questions, please hang around to ask. Otherwise, guys, I'm so very proud of you. Hang in there, stay safe. I love you and I'm praying for you. And I want you to have a wonderful day. All right, I'm stopping the recording.